All right, so this would have been a while ago now at this point, but I teased the idea that I was going to talk about George Janko, and today's the day. Let me start off with a couple of things about this. One is just my opinion, right? Just my opinion. I don't even, it's a weird thing that online content now requires that in a lot of ways, but just my opinion. So if you don't like it, you don't have to. Just with a grain of salt, all of that. That's the first thing. Second thing is, didn't come onto my radar until I encountered another guy named Wesley Huff, who is interviewed on a George Janko podcast episode. And he's kind of made a really big splash recently and seems like an interesting, decent guy. I've been into apologetics for a long time. I'm personally not an apologist. I'm a polemicist. If you don't know what the difference between those two things are, you can ask and I'll tell you later. But I have a more than a casual interest in apologetics. So Wesley Huff and his appearance on Joe Rogan and his debate with Billy Carson and all that stuff kind of brought me into this specific circumstance that we're going to talk about now. So if you aren't aware, George Janko has an interview podcast show, web show, whatever you want to call it. And so that's his thing. And there's different breeds of interview podcasts. I want to kind of lay that groundwork first. And it's more like there's different formats of interview conversation. And so, and any show can host any number of these. And in fact, depending on the particular circumstance, an interview can kind of transmute from one format to another depending on how things go. But I'd say the most common form of the interview podcast or the dialogue podcast is of two people that already are predisposed to general agreement about most things. The reason they've even agreed to do the show, more or less, is that presupposition of agreement and that they're going to get together and one of two things is going to happen. Either the two are going to do a response thing to some other third party's content. Maybe they're going to kind of spot check some video of some kind from some other third creator, and the two of them are just kind of going to pick it apart. Or the alternative is that the two of them are just going to talk about what they agree about. And basically, it ends up this conversational circle jerk of the two of them talking about what their common ground is. Those are the two most common. If you go across the internet, almost all dialogue content is going to be that format throughout at least the duration of the internet so far. Just the landscape, it's going to be interviewer, interviewee. They're both just kind of telling each other things that they already know. This often will also be like the backdrop for a promotional run where the interviewee probably has a book or something, some form of content that they are promoting, and that is the insight or the incisive event that caused the dialogue. And so there's that. So there's that. And most of them are that way. Just overwhelmingly, whether it's politics or whatever, they tend to be that of person hosting the show brought in someone who is an ally or someone that's on their side, and they're just going to talk about those things. That's A1 and AB, or 1A and 1B. The next category is the hostile interview. This is going to be most of the Charlie Kirk on college campus things. This is the Steven Crowder change my mind stuff. This is going to be the street preachers, like most of that type of content, which is actually somewhat new, but a lot of the political stuff is going to be this, just pearly things. Um, I mean, we can go on and on and on this way, but person who's hosting the show is using home field advantage in order to embarrass, draw out their opponents, expose them, dunk on them, all that kind of thing. It's mainly that. You come onto my show, I make you look like a fool, you leave, and then the next episode, maybe even the next few episodes, is me going to be doing um, digestion of how great I did, how poorly you did, and challenging other people to come in and fill in that hostile role so that I can continue to look good and you can continue to look bad. Your side can continue to look bad. And definitely not my favorite. It may seem like I have kind of a antagonistic personality, but actually I don't like that kind of content at all. The third type of interview podcast is the just open-minded listener. This is the Joe Rogans, the Dave Rubins, these type, where they bring someone in and they just sit there and they may ask a few pursuant questions here or there, but out of a 2-hour conversation, 4-hour conversation, we're talking Joe Rogan, sometimes up to 6-hour conversation, and 90% of that conversation is going to be the guest just diatribing, just saying stuff, just talking. And so you may have a few prompted things here or there. The host might interject things to clarify, but really they're only there as a stand-in for the audience, to act as kind of a sounding board, to keep the interview guest talking. Often this also is a venue for the promotional tour type stuff. A lot of the late night people do this kind of a thing, but not really. Anyway, yeah, the main goal is to get a person onto the show to say whatever it is that they want to say, and then they leave, and that's it. Like, there isn't follow-up generally. There isn't a whole lot of anything like that. They just one-offs. The next, and this is the type that George Janko is, he invites guests onto his show so that he can say what he wants to say. He invites guests intentionally that are going to act as an opportunistic venue for him to be able to get opportunities to say his part. And some people might disagree with me about that. I listened to probably 20 episodes of his podcast back to back because I was kind of looking for some things to kind of get an idea of what exactly this was, of some of the things that he thinks and feels and believes, and that's what I got from it. He invites people onto his show, and then he does half or more of the talking. That even in an instance where he's getting experts in their field to come in and talk on his show, he's still doing half or more of the contribution. And even though throughout those dialogues, he will often try to backpedal off of some of the things he'll say and say, I'm no expert, I'm not authority on anything like that, so Lord forgive me if I say things that are false or whatever. Like, he tries to soft pedal the stuff that he's saying, but he's definitely saying the things that he wants to say, just ignorantly. And that's something that I find fascinating in some ways about his show, is that he's this, I'm on a journey type of stuff. And it's the same thing that I've brought up in the past with the Nala Rays, the the Russell Brands, the Kat Von D's, the people that are recent converts. that they just flip their influential platforms from what they once were into this kind of Christian content stream. What ends up happening is, first of all, they're just ignorant. And that's not a derogatory statement, it's an assessment of reality that they don't know a lot about Christianity because they're new to it. I wouldn't expect anyone day 2 of their Christian walk to be some sort of expert regarding it, regardless of what direction they came into the faith. If they came in from being an expert in some scientific research field, or if they came in from a lifetime of just being a church kid but never having made a real confession, I wouldn't expect day 2 for them to have a substantial footing underneath them. That would be unfair. And so to elevate them into the realm of teacher, influencer, leader is dangerous. It's dangerous for a lot of reasons. Of number one, they just don't know. And so if they're going to speak, even if you want to say like, well, they're not authoritative, they're not trying to be a pastor, they're not, but the thing is, influence is influence. And that it's a dangerous thing to wield when, in fact, you don't know what it is you're doing with it. You don't know what you're saying, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, it's just simply dangerous. It's not something that should be done. And all the people that are around them that are more mature Christians, that in my mind actually seems to be exploiting those people, because they see it as an opportunity to get themselves a little bit of clout by going on their shows and appearing in their content and things. Those people should be actively trying to dissuade these individuals from appearing on shows, from making interview appearances, from creating content. In fact, what they should be doing is saying, no, you need to step aside, out of the spotlight, into seclusion, into obscurity for an extended period of time, where people that are able to hold you accountable are able to do just that, hold you accountable, and to help you develop real fruit of salvation. And so it should be 20 years from now, maybe not that long, but like a decade from now, when Entertainment Tonight is doing an expose of what happened to, or where have they been, of Kat Von D, or of Nala Ray, or of Richard, or I don't know why I keep calling him Richard, but Russell Brand. They should be, well, they fell out of the limelight. They intentionally cultivated privacy, and in that grew spiritually, and just doing the work of discipleship in the background, so that 10 years from now you see that they have a great family and a great marriage and healthy church life, and maybe they write a tell-all book or something, like whatever, like that the fruit is there already to be readily assessed, so that if they want to become an influencer after that, then they'll be ready to be able to handle that kind of pressure, that kind of platform. And quite frankly, one of the things about influence and platform and all of that is a lot of it is it's just seductive and dangerous, and it's not really something anyone should ever pursue under nearly any circumstance. It's so dangerously toxic in the way that it corrupts even the most well-meaning. It should not be something anyone actively pursues. And it's something I've criticized, maybe drawn awareness to, about the whole celebrity pastor culture. It's the exact same phenomenon, that you shouldn't be pursuing that. Just simply, and it's not a mistake that there's not a single one that hasn't had some sort of negative scandal, sexual impropriety, just stepping on landmines, disqualifying them. Like, it's not a mistake that just keeps happening. And yes, small church pastors can have just as many difficulties. Yes, they can. But when a denomination has divisions of its ministry over entire hemispheres of the planet, and it turns out the person that is the apex of that organization has been sexually abusing women, and leveraging the influence of that denomination to do that, it's just not the same thing as small church pastor misused church funds. Like, yes, it's sinful. No, it's not the same. And if you want, I can do a whole thing about the different breeds of those things. But anyway, back to George Janko. Just as a few words of caution, unfortunately, I can't bring the receipts. I wish I could, but I don't have the ability to edit. But there's a few things that I just really want to highlight. One is saying, I'm just on a journey, is not an acceptable excuse for leveraging influence when you don't know what you're talking about. It's just not. Like, if you know that you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk. That's, in fact, actually what the Bible would teach, of that James says that not everyone should ascribe to become teachers, because teachers will undergo greater condemnation, that they will have greater responsibility, that Jesus himself saying that it would be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and throw yourself into the sea than for you to cause another person to stumble. Like, this is very serious. This is not something to be taken lightly. Influence, especially with the internet and the way that it's democratized access to global scale influence, that is not something to be taken lightly. And so for you to just backpedal and say, well, I don't really know what I'm doing or what I'm talking about, but listen, you have an audience. So if you don't know what you're talking about, number one, shut your mouth. Don't talk. Number two, get educated. Investigate. Find out what the scholarship has to say about the Trinity, about eschatology, about just these, like, find out where the lines are on these things. Because it's not as though Christian tradition, patristics, theology, doxology has been silent about these issues. Like, libraries filled with this information. Go find it. It's there. And in fact, because of the fact that the Christian church has been around for a little while, a lot of it is in the public domain. It's freely accessible. Go find it. Sit down and read. And here's the divergent issue. A lot of these individuals that are in the same basket, category, bucket of George Janko are so busy making content. It's the grind, right? I mean, you got to keep doing this stuff, or else the algorithms will move on from you. If you don't have a regular schedule and quality equipment and, whatever, like, the algorithm's just going to move on, going to leave you behind, and they know it, and they've got sponsorship deals to satisfy. They're so busy making content, they don't have time. They have not given themselves time. They don't make time for them to actively pursue intellectual development. They just don't. And if you listen to the way he talks in particular, and a lot of the people that are of this same breed of interview podcasts, is they substitute having these interview guests on as personal development. They'll even prime some of these. He even tries to prime some of these guests of like, I wanted to get this person on so that as they talk, I can learn. That's dangerous, because what if they say things that are false, deceptive, misleading, incomplete? You don't have the discernment necessary to be able to determine those things as the host, which means that your filter is going to be off or deceived. Your discernment is going to be underperforming in this environment, and your audience, which often it tends to be pretty consistent, that the audience tends to match the host, personality wise, developmental wise, things like that. And so a lot of, quite frankly, his audience generally, I imagine, are the same type that he is. And so their discernment's going to be equally low, poorly attuned. And so if someone is saying things that are false, misrepresentative of facts, incomplete, skewed, biased, whatever, those things are just going to go right through their defenses and down their throats. And you have the ability, potentially, to mislead entire generations. It's not something to be trifled with. Not all of you should desire to become teachers, because teachers will undergo greater condemnation. This is very serious. And so, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk. Sit down with a book and read it. Digest it. Take notes. Find experts. Dialogue with them in private. Off camera. Digest. Take notes. Read more. This is simple stuff. I mean, it's sad that these kind of things even need to be discussed in today's society, but it's true. People have lost the ability somehow to just be quiet and contemplative about things. But let's talk about some of the issues, the real issues in this series. Just in the several podcast episodes of his that I heard, he had former presidential candidates on, Ben Carson, who is a former Republican candidate, and comedians, Russell Brand and Lecrae. Like, he had a bunch of different people whose names that I recognize, and they were talking about all these a whole variety of different things. And one thing about him is he has a very conciliatory personality. Just him as an interviewer, him as a personality, it's very conciliatory. It means anytime there's instances where there might be some conflict, kind of a little bit of friction starting to develop, he would immediately back down in order to try to draw his guest in. And that's a tactic in some ways. It is good interview tactics in some ways. But the thing is, he would only seem to do this in instances that matter. Talking to Ben Carson about the concept of hell, and saying that a loving God could never send people to hell. And granted, something that people discuss, something that people have the tendency to disagree about, sure, fine, whatever. There's different theories about hell, about eternal conscious torment, about there's annihilationism and universalism. Like, there's various different theories here, none of which were vocalized. Nothing about the debate was vocalized. They're just in their feelings about what they think a loving God would or wouldn't do. And that's a dangerous place to be, not realizing it. So that's one thing. Another, when he's talking about saying that him and his, I guess now wife, previous girlfriend, were living in continuative sexual promiscuity with one another. And you can say that, well, they're in a committed relationship. Doesn't matter. That's the cultural value now. But it's not the biblical ethic regarding sexuality. And I can already see and hear a whole bunch of teenage boys, a whole bunch of young girls seeing that. They're like, well, that's what they're doing. It must be okay. And I'll remind you, remember, if you would cause anyone to stumble, it'd be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck, throw yourself into the sea. That's very serious. And it needs to be taken seriously. And so, saying that, well, I just don't feel convicted about that. It's just almost a direct quote. Not quite, but it's almost a direct quote. I just don't feel convicted about that. That should frighten you. The fact that something is clearly described as sinful in Scripture, and you being engaged in that thing, and that doesn't bother you, that should scare you. And it's the conversation with Pete Holmes, comedian Pete Holmes, as well. The conversation that he has with Pete Holmes is full of all sorts of just woo-woo nonsense, spiritually and doctrinally. But again, because he doesn't have his cleats on theologically, doctrinally, he had no way of being able to push back on it. It's not the same as like inspiring philosophy will occasionally have people that are not fully aligned with traditional orthodoxy. And he, of course, does have good footing regarding a lot of theological and philosophical beliefs and things, and so he does have the ability to push backwards on those things, and that you get a sense of where the truth can kind of lie instead of whoever the guest happens to be. That's one thing. Exposing some of the gaps, the flaws. George Janko does not have that. And so I can see a lot of people being like, oh, so what you're saying is I can have the spiritualism without having to commit myself to Christ? And then going off down a horrendous rabbit hole towards destruction, self-harm, emotional devastation, because of something they were exposed to on your show. And then denying the Trinity. He espouses something that sounds like modalism, and the reason I say it like that is he doesn't have the knowledge. If I asked him if he is a modalist, he probably wouldn't know what I was talking about, and that if I described that, he probably would deny it, I'd imagine. It's just the fact that he doesn't know what he's talking about means that he doesn't have the footing to be able to speak in a really robust way about these things. But he doesn't know that. And so it's something that I really struggle with all the way through. Like, and of course, me having the personality I have, like I argue with the podcasts I listen to. It was difficult. So it's something to consider. Just if you listen to his podcast, that you need to have your discernment dialed as high up as you can get it. And I would even say that it's probably better for anyone to not consume it. That's what I would suggest. It's probably better to just stay away, because it's not about what's redeemable. It's about the things that speak half-truths are the ones that are the most deceptive, because the lies seep in anyways. So I would say if you don't have really well-tuned discernment, you should probably stay away. You probably should just walk away from it and not go back unless he chooses to repent and seek to be a better influence, quite frankly.